Thank you for listening to the Kyle and Tim podcast, where we have authentic conversations that help cultivate a better understanding of ourselves, our guests, and the world we live in. This podcast is about our guests, getting to know them, their backgrounds, experiences, thoughts, and ideas. We really appreciate you listening. Before we introduce our next guest, we'd like to introduce a few of our sponsors that help make this podcast possible.
Today's podcast is brought to you by Mountain Mule Transportation, located here in Bozeman, Montana. Mountain Mule is a private SUV and truck service, offering chauffeur services in all of Southwest Montana. Whether it's your next skiing, hunting, or fishing trip, early morning or late night trips to and from Bozeman Airport, as well as weddings and private parties. No matter the occasion, Mountain Mule will get you there safely and on time. To learn more, visit mountain-mule.com and book today.
Welcome to the Kyle and Tim podcast. I'm today's guest, Tyler Botzon. Today we had the great time talking about everything from being a beach bum on the California coast to crab fishing in Alaska for several years to going to school in my 30s to private equity to becoming a wellness founder and everything in between.
Hell yeah, that was perfect. Enjoy, folks. Thanks,
Yeah,
Tyler.
thank you. Where are you from? Where were you born, raised? Let's go all the way back.
Okay. Well, it's kind of a hard question to answer, but I was born and raised in California, on the coast of California, just south of Big Sur, really rural area, small little beach town called Cayucos. And then I spent about a decade in Alaska. And then from there, I went to Seattle, to New York, to Salt Lake City, to the Eastern Sierra, to Montana. And then I lived in the Silicon Valley in between for about a year. That's where I came from to here. I was living in Half Moon Bay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay. Awesome. You've been around.
How long were you there before you went to Alaska?
Where, California?
Yeah.
Till I was 18.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Right on.
Right there in the Central Coast.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Are you familiar with like San Luis Obispo?
I grew up in Pasadena and then went to college in Northern California. So,
Oh, cool.
Plenty of college friends that kind of grew up in the Bay Area, south of the Bay, or somewhere in between, in Central California. Plenty of people on the coast as well. So, yeah.
Nice. Yeah. I love it. I'm a coastal dweller, so I feel most at home next to the ocean.
Yeah. What a great place to grow up.
Yeah, definitely. I'm very, very lucky.
What was it like to grow up there? Like what memories do you have?
I think one of the things about growing up in a place like that is that you get exposed to a kind of countercultural way of life. And I was, growing up next to the coast, really into surfing. And so I was heavily influenced by sort of this alternative lifestyle that was kind of there. People call it a beach bum, or, there's a bunch of different names for it and a bunch of different variants of it. But I think being next to that kind of soulful sort of community that's really connected to nature and living by the rhythms of the ocean and the swell and kind of basing their life around that was probably the most impactful part. My uncle was a high school teacher on the Central Coast, big wave surfer, a huge mentor of mine growing up. And so I think I was just kind of brought into the fold that way. And then also just California being so diverse in terms of topography. My dad was a big climber. And so I just had a lot of access to Yosemite and in the ocean. And it's really impactful.
Yeah. Central Coast seems like such a, it's pretty raw. I would describe it as like it's a raw place. Like, you have to drive hours to get to one of the cities.
Yeah.
And I guess like the weather, I guess, it kind of forces it to be a little bit raw, I would imagine.
Yeah.
There's some cold, really cold, days, ocean, near the ocean days. So that's probably it's like a raw place.
Definitely. I mean, it's certainly changed, and since the recession, it's kind of been, when I moved there, it was a lot of nurses and general contractors that could afford homes there. Now it's been pretty hollowed out by Airbnb and second home. But the soul is still there. There's still a core contingent of soulful locals that are making it happen. And I love going back to visit for sure.
Do you spend a lot of time in the ocean?
Yeah. So I grew up on the Central Coast, and then I was a commercial fisherman in Alaska for a decade. So I've spent years of my life on the water.
Cool. That's awesome.
What's the population where you grew up?
Cayucos, I think, is 1,500 to 3,000, somewhere in there.
Just pretty small.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a small community. Yeah,
Wow.
it's the way the Central Coast works is it's like a little constellation of small coastal towns, and then there's San Luis Obispo, which is the big college city. Kind of, I don't know, it's probably about 20 miles inland. But so I lived in one of the small kind of northern coastal communities called Cayucos.
What kind of stuff did you do in the ocean as a kid?
You know, mostly surfed. We would you know, do some snorkeling and stuff like that. You know, go into the tide pools during leopard shark breeding season, and that was always kind of exciting. And fished a little bit when I was living there, but mostly surfed.
Nice.
Yeah.
Wearing a wetsuit like 90% of the time.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's as cold as Oregon. The thing about California is that you get the Humboldt current, which is kind of coming down with cold water from Alaska is being pulled down, and it kind of just strafes the whole northern part of the California coast. So the water's cold as hell.
Temperatures like in the 50s.
Low 50s.
Yeah.
Yeah. So hooded, booties.
Yeah.
All that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Cool.
I was going to ask you just said something about sharks. How do you feel about sharks when you're in the water?
Might be kind of morbid, but I always figure if there's going to be a way to go, like that's a pretty honorable way to go, you know?
Yeah, I always wonder, people ask me about bears out here,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't think about it a lot. I'm just like, be prepared, but you can't really be too prepared for a shark.
Yeah.
I can't really be too prepared for a bear.
I mean, you could have a
Sure.
gun or bear spray. Like you have at least some lines of defense.
Yeah, I guess you're.
A shark, you're pretty.
Yeah.
pretty fucked.
But I think getting mauled by a grizz is almost worse than getting taken out by a shark. I don't know. I've been around bears a lot, obviously living in Alaska. And then I had a friend who was almost mauled in Haines a couple years ago. And then also too, if you go on Wikipedia and look at the history of bear grizz, I think it's all bear attacks. I'm not sure if it's a mix or one or the other, but if you go look at the history, the data on bear attacks, one thing you'll notice in that data is that there's no trend at all. And that's what scares me the most. It's like all these different bear attacks
because there's no information on it.
And there's just like no real pattern to it. Like you have these instances where people are just killed in all these different ways. It's a wide range of just different ways that it happens, where I feel like with sharks and stuff like that, maybe there's more of a pattern. I don't know, but I was taken back by that. And I have a friend actually who was on a trip in the Arctic guiding a rafting trip, and they came around a bend and they found some shred. I mean, this is in the middle of nowhere in the Arctic, so it's not like there's not casual hiking going on.
Out there fucking rafting.
Yeah, he's rafting. He came around a horseshoe bend and they found a bunch of tents that had been shredded.
Fuck.
And they walked up in there and there was a bear eating on a torso. And the way that the bear's pattern is that it killed both people and then buried. So like there's a certain time of year where the bears are killing and burying. And like, I don't know. It's just
they're burying their food for like later in the season.
Yeah, especially in the Arctic. So I don't know. That one kind of haunted me. And then my friend almost getting mauled. I don't know. Bears kind of scare me more. Let's just say I don't run with headphones.
You're saying Montana. they're intentional murderers, is what you're getting at,
or just random acts of murder. I don't know. Yeah.
What's your line of defense when you're running? Do you carry?
Well, when I was running in Alaska, I would run with a 45 auto. And then I would run with bear spray. And so it's kind of like a primary, secondary kind of thing there. Bear spray kind of scares me if it's windy, especially in places like Alaska where it's just howling wind. And yeah.
How did you hold your pistol?
How did I hold it?
Yeah. Like, was it in a chest mount?
Oh,
or was it in a backpack?
It was in a drop holster that I had modified. In fact, if there's anyone who makes gear here in Bozeman, I really want a running belt that can hold it in the back.
Uh-huh.
And then it's like an elastic belt with a handle and you can spin it around and pull it.
Yeah. Okay.
No one's innovated that yet. So if there's someone out there, I will definitely.
So that would be, yeah. So, cause you want to run with it on your back.
Yeah. Cause when it's a drop holster, it just like bounces and
yeah,
I don't like it.
I'm trying to think, is FHF, do they make holsters?
I don't know.
I know Rick, I don't know if Rick knows the guys that work there or something. I think, yeah. Let's let Rick know to send the word.
That'd be awesome.
We should make a running holster.
You don't like the chest ones?
No, there's just, you want to keep that area clear. It's just, if you have weight on the front like that,
yeah,
just jostle. And so that when you look at running gear, it's all really tight, super tight and elastic.
Mystery Ranch could probably do that too.
I don't run a lot, but like it is tricky with the way like the way things are balanced.
Totally.
I notice it can like not much can really kind of throw off the way you're
Yeah.
stepping and landing and
Yeah, and so if, like the running belts that I wear, like it's like it looks like that big.
Looks
around.
like a fanny pack.
Stretch it around, yeah, and you step into it and snap it onto your waist.
Okay, so let's go back to where you grew up. I think it's interesting that you kind of maybe look back as an adult, about how the place that you grew up kind of shaped you. What do you think you gleaned from kind of growing up on the Central Coast? Like, what sticks with you now? And as you moved around, it sounds like you moved around quite a bit. Like, what are some of those things that you've stuck with you over time?
Well, I think the main lesson is like I said, seeing people like live a very pure alternative lifestyle attached to nature and really finding fulfillment through that. And it's something that can't be really bought. I mean, of course, the gear costs a little bit of money to surf or climb, but it was just that left a huge impression on me that there's just something completely alternative and just as pure as anything else that you're kind of told is normal. And I think that like both. It was the Central Coast, but also Yosemite Valley. I had a really tight connection with Yosemite Valley. My dad was there all the time. We were spending a month during the summer every year in the valley, living at Camp 4 and seeing this global community of climbers come through there. So between the coast and the surfing and the climbing and the Sierra, those are the things that have stuck with me forever and has kind of been my guiding, I don't know, star in a way.
Yeah, what a cool time to be in Yosemite.
Yeah, the 90s.
Yeah. And I'm not a climber, and I wouldn't say I know anything about climbing or don't know a lot about the climbing industry, but I think about people who've kind of, I guess, probably shaped the industry. They were right there.
Yeah. And I was lucky enough to be a little young dude running around that scene and seeing them do that and seeing these people live these just massive lives with no money and just doing the craziest athletic and
massively meaningful lives.
Yeah. And just and literally massive, like climbing El Capitan in like 3 hours or like slacklining, between a gap or like just things that were huge. And they were poor and it was incredible. And a lot of those people turned out to be huge names in the industry and, have made really cool lives for themselves and shared it with people and inspired millions. So it's cool to see that.
Yeah. Awesome.
Do you have any siblings?
I do. I have a sister. She's 3 years younger than me, lives in Silverthorne.
Okay. So would she be climbing with you guys a lot and doing a lot of that stuff?
No, climbing wasn't really her thing.
Okay.
Yeah. But I think she's always had a respect for like mountain culture and stuff like that.
So your dad climbed.
Yeah.
And you said your uncle surfed.
Yeah.
Let's focus on your dad for a second. So he got you into climbing at what age?
I don't even remember starting.
Okay. Yeah. So day one, basically. Yeah. And you guys would spend a month there?
Yeah. In the summers, we'd spend a couple weeks to a month every summer, especially when I was in high school. So I was a competitive climber in California for quite a while. And that's where I kind of got my technique and strength. And then we started going to Yosemite.
Okay. Awesome.
How does that look, like competitive climbing?
Well, back then it looked a lot different than it does today. Today it looks like in the NFL compared to what it used to look like.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean,
like it's like organized and there's sponsorships.
Back then you were at these, urban climbing gyms where the walls were still made out of plywood, and there was like one or two hold manufacturers during those days. It looked a lot different. And so the nearest climbing gym was a ways away. So I was getting pulled out of school, thankfully, to go to that. And it was really cool to be in a competitive environment and then just be able to be coached in such a way that it just transferred so well to real rock and at a young age. So it gave you this like really empowered, like an identity at a very young age, like 10, 11, 12. You're just like, wow, I'm a climber and I can do this as well as a lot of people. So the structure of competitive climbing was really important. And I think the community of it was really cool because you kind of were competitive with other young people and pushed you.
As far as the competition, how is it? I mean, how do you compete? Is it time? Is it technique?
There's both. There's both. There's speed climbing and back then, I don't know, there might be more now. Like back then it was bouldering, roped climbing, speed climbing. And so bouldering and roped climbing is kind of a points. Back then they would sum up points based on how far you got. And speed climbing was just you running up the wall. And the speed climbing stuff nowadays is incredible. Like, take it out. Like, I would love to, like, in my, maybe in my 40s, like, have another run at speed climbing.
Cool.
It's pretty cool how it's evolved.
What'd your parents do for work?
My mom is a nurse. My dad was a general contractor.
Okay.
And that was a very kind of common makeup on the coast in those days.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. It's interesting, right? So, like, I would say people who grow up in big cities or even not on the Central Coast, let's put it that way, or not in a kind of a unique area like that. Like, there's probably in the 90s there was no climbing, right? Meaning, like, you couldn't do AYSO climbing, right? Or, like, youth baseball or soccer or football climbing, right? So I would imagine it's probably pretty unique. Was it unique for you, or was it unique to the area that you grew up in? Meaning, were there other kids in your school that climbed, and you were kind of like an outcast? You're like, no,
Yeah.
I don't play soccer, I don't play football or baseball,
exactly.
like I do climbing. So you were kind of like an outcast a little bit.
Maybe.
Maybe I'm using the wrong word. But.
Yeah, outcast for sure. But I don't think I really cared about that, because I would go and be immersed in this community of, first of all, competitive climbing with young people who were really obsessed with it. But more importantly, when I'm in a place like Yosemite and in my young years like that, you were seeing people in their 20s and their 30s that are just incredibly impressive in the way that they live their life. And so I had, like, a cohort of people my age that were, not in my local community, but were doing it. And then you could see what was 10 years down the road.
Uh-huh.
And so it just gave me a lot of meaning. And then I became, like, not really worried about acceptance within, like, for instance, like peers in the, public school or something like that. I just didn't really care, because I would just be way more interested in Climbing Magazine and Alpinist Magazine, and then worrying about video games or soccer or any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. That's awesome, dude.
Yeah.
If you think about
huge.
like the impact that it had on you, but also that, like, you were able to see something completely different and feel really good about it.
Yeah. It literally made me who I am today. And I'm very, very grateful that my dad got me into it. It's a huge gift.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, you definitely don't hear that. People are like, oh, I played, like you said, soccer, baseball, but climbing, especially then, like maybe here in Bozeman, that could be more common now. Just
yeah.
But also that, like, there was, I don't know, I feel like somewhat of a leap of faith in a sense, but maybe not, because if you were just so drawn to it that, like, there was no leap of faith, meaning like, hey, I'm going to dedicate myself to this thing that's, like, not mainstream, and be like, just because I like it.
Yeah.
Like, that's awesome.
Yeah. I'm so fortunate to have had that exposure. And I've gone through a lot of transitions in my life from an identity standpoint, but, like, things that I learned through the climbing community have really steered me, like, and still do.
Cool. That's awesome.
Yeah, that is cool. Yeah, and I mean, clearly, like, you weren't, if something you wanted to do, if your sister didn't do it, I'm assuming you both had the option, and it was, yeah, I like this, or yeah, I don't.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I could have done anything. I could have done anything, and my parents would have supported my passion.
What was your dad like as a person, as a man?
Really gentle, very, very patient. Definitely a big inspiration, and super hardworking. Blue collar working ethic, and just brave. I mean, we climbed our first big wall in Yosemite, and what a big wall is in climbing terminology is generally it's, over 1,000 feet, very steep, and you spend the night on the wall. And we did our first big wall together. Like, my parents had me really young, so I think he was probably, like, in his maybe early 30s, and I was probably 13, and we were up there together.
And it was his first big wall too.
Big wall, yeah.
Wow.
And we were figuring it out together, sleeping in a hanging portaledge, and it took a lot of bravery on both of our behalves to get through it.
Dude, that is fucking sick.
Yeah.
Like, that does take a huge pair of balls on your dad's part to be like, I'm going to take my 13-year-old son out to do this for the first time. And
the classic part is that route he had failed on 2 or 3 times before with grown-ass men.
Dude, that is fucking crazy.
Yeah, so it's a cool story.
Okay. Yeah. All right. We're going to have to interview your dad too.
I almost wonder, this is like I was just I was listening to Steve Rennell.
Like most parents won't take their kids out to ride a bike in the street, like down the street, you know?
Here's what I was listening to Steve Rennell, and he was talking about something pretty morbid. It was like a bunch of families died. There was a bunch of cannibalism in this. Like, just bear with me here.
Yeah.
But he was saying the families that everyone that survived were the parents that had kids. Like, of all these, like, there's like 120 people and maybe half of them survived, but it was the ones that had kids. They were the ones that survived. And it almost made me think when
You're
said
talking
that,
about the Donner Party.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
nice. Yeah.
It makes me think, because you were saying he failed it so many times, but then he had his kid with him. I wonder if his will to do it was
Could've
that
been.
much.
His brain
Yeah.
changed.
Yeah, because that's what like Steve was thinking. Is these people's brain, you go into a different mode with your brain
wow.
when you have kids, and you want to, like, if you're trying to keep your kids alive versus, I wonder if he made that switch, if like whatever he did, you said failed it a couple times, and then he's like, I got my son with me, like, we're doing this. There's no.
Well, then on the flip side, we actually failed on a lot of big climbs like that together too, even before that, actually. And one quick short story is we were in Zion. I think this is probably 2002, 2003. So I was probably 12 or 13. Yeah, somewhere around 12. And we were trying to climb a rock pillar called Moonlight Buttress. It's just this insane single crack that's like a ball of thread, drops for 900 feet. It's just a single crack, goes all the way up. And we were climbing it. We were going to spend the night on the wall, and we were slow because in some ways we were both kind of beginners at big wall climbing. And this like badass group of dudes with like no gear, moving super fast, like pass us and get way up this thing. Well, I don't know if you've ever been in Zion when a thunderstorm comes in.
I've not been there a couple
it
times.
is one of the most intense things you can experience. Like, especially if it starts raining in the high country before it gets to you. We just saw these huge waterfalls start pouring out of nowhere across the canyon. Like, what is this? And then, thunder and lightning and like little snowflakes. And
what
stuff.
a cool, that by itself is an amazing experience.
And we were on this wall, like very exposed, very, 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 very exposed to the elements, just on a sheer vertical wall. And the guys ahead of us, they were so competent and moving so fast. They only brought one rope, and like, it's a technical thing, but you need two ropes to rappel because you have to have a rope to retrieve your rope when you rappel. So if you go with one, you have one direction you can go and it's up. And these guys were going for it, and they passed us, and they get way up on this thing. And they're probably 400 feet ahead of us on the wall, and they're stuck in this hailstorm with thunder and lightning. And I was like, at the time was like, let's bail, like, let's search and rescue kind of handle this. And my dad was like, no, we got to go up and help these guys. And my dad was leading pitches in a lightning storm on the side of this sheer sandstone wall. And I'm just, and he got up to these guys and we got him down. It was pretty cool. That was before we succeeded in Yosemite together, but it was another, just like, it left a mark on me seeing that, doing the right thing.
You had to get them a rope so they could get themselves.
Exactly. Yeah. It was pretty wild. And in this,
which you guys put yourself in a lot of danger to go help them.
Yeah. I was kind of tucked up in a little cave. He was out there really putting it on the line. It was cool. It was cool as hell. Left a big impression.
Yeah. That's a badass thing to witness.
Yeah.
Be a part of.
Yeah. I don't know which one that is, but I've been to Zion and I've seen those. What'd you call it?
It's called Moonlight Buttress. I'll show you a picture of it. It's just this sheer pillar it's stunning.
They're wild.
Yeah.
Yeah. In Zion, they're like, anyway. Yeah. That's really cool.
Did you guys go back and try to reattempt that one?
We went and sent it later. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I could see how this could form your identity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. Like, hey, we're going to go back and do that.
Yeah.
Well, we saved those guys. Now we're going to go back and conquer.
Mm-hmm. What was your mom like?
Oh, she's just the coolest, most supportive, loving, hardworking woman. Just humble and really just level-headed. Really keeps her cool through a lot of heat sometimes, and just an amazing.
Through her husband taking her child out on these crazy wild adventures.
Yeah, I mean, in all fairness, my dad was probably saying, "Hey, we're going to go climbing for the week," and she was like, "Oh, okay, that sounds great."
Yeah.
I don't think she really was putting it together that we were going and doing these very sheer, big overnight rock climbs.
Yeah.
Does she or did she ever do any climbing herself?
I think she did a little bit, but I think it didn't really call to her. But she really loved the climbing community because, I mean, she was also pretty young back in those days, in the 90s in Yosemite, and being around the campfire with these like just larger than life characters like Dean Potter, the Huber brothers, like people like these old school just badasses that were there, I think that, that lifestyle also made a huge impression on her in the same way it did for me.
Awesome. Sounds like you have some badass, really cool parents.
Yeah, I'm super lucky.
Cool. What's your sister like?
Oh, she's really cool. Just a social butterfly, and really loves curating just experiences and hangouts. And she's in event planning in Silverthorne.
Where's Silverthorne? Why do I know this name and I can't place it?
It's right next to Breckenridge.
Oh, okay, right there.
It's
okay.
a ski town.
Yeah,
a glitzy ski town.
Yep. Okay, now I know. Now I know where I knew that name from. I've been to Breckenridge once for a handful of days, and I remember Silverthorne. Okay, cool. So she does event planning out there.
Yeah, she's awesome. Very well traveled, and she was up in Alaska grinding out in the canneries. Would go up there and process fish, like these hard hitting scenes, and then take the money and go travel in South America, and she's cool.
Venture.
Yeah, very cool.
Awesome.
How do you compare yourself to her as far, or would you say you're very social as well, or the opposite, or somewhere in the middle?
I'm kind of she's more steady in her ability to be an extrovert and outgoing. I just have these violent waves of,
in and out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We were talking with a gentleman yesterday about how exhausting that can be too, of just you got to kind of recharge if you're very social and talking to people all the time. Yeah.
Well, we can talk about this later if you'd like, but I went through a huge career change at one point where I went from being a, crabber, alpinist, curmudgeon to business school and finance. And there was a huge inflection point there where it was I had to socialize all the time, and not just socialize, but executive communication. And it's very performance pressure, and you have to be smooth and talking and selling. And so that was really hard for me. Yeah.
The transition.
Yeah. It was painful, but it was good growth.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, let's get into that. But before that, so let's, you graduate high school.
Yeah, super troubled punk rocker, expelled from high school.
Interesting that you say. I want to investigate this. The reason I want to investigate this is because I think, I've said this a few times on the podcast, but I have a friend who was troubled, and now you look back and you're like, dude, you were just doing normal kid shit. So I think it's interesting, and he's told me about it, where he's like, yeah, man, I thought that I was a bad kid. And then I thought I was a bad kid until I was an adult, until I was 30 years old. And he's like, I wasn't a bad kid. I was just doing normal kid shit. So I'm curious about when you say troubled, what do you mean by that?
I was always just kind of nonconformist and anti-establishment from an early age. And all the locals in Cayucos were just we all as kids were the same way. Skateboard, extreme sports, just
X Games.
Yeah. and just in general, kind of F the system kind of attitude. And so I didn't have much of a tolerance threshold for being told what to do by a meat grinder institution of the public school system. And
yep.
I wasn't really buying the whole thing at the time. They were saying, do good here, get loans, go to school at a college, and and I was just man, that is not for me. I've seen all this other stuff that is just way more up my alley than this. And so I just generally had a rejection to the whole thing, and was eventually kicked out, and then went to a continuation school, which was the best thing that could have ever happened to me at that age. Mm-hmm. Gave me a lot of independence, and allowed me to feel really comfortable in my own skin.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, I didn't go to public school.
Nice.
But I feel I would have had the exact same, I could just I don't know. That was just sort of the era I grew up in. And I had a bunch of friends that went to public school, but I would just I do not think it would have.
Tim was homeschooled his whole life.
Awesome.
Never been to school.
So I could just see that, because that was my tendency as well. And I also look at the whole school system with a totally kind of unique perspective of, you sit there all day and it just seems, I don't know, it seems kind of insane.
Yeah.
I think it's more of a lot of people that fucking hate this, but I think it's more so of a daycare, right? Which in a sense, it makes sense, because you're hey, your parents are working, right? So somebody's got to take care of your kids. It's not really school. It's half daycare, half school.
Yeah.
The normal school system is it's half daycare.
Yeah.
It's okay, you pay taxes and somebody's going to watch your kid for the day.
So you can work.
I-
Yeah.
Right. So like, that's kind of a fucked up situation right there.
Yeah.
When you said that, you reminded me because I'm like, I also watched a lot of Jackass growing up.
Well, how old are you?
I'm 35.
Yeah. So I'm 37.
I'm 33.
Nice.
Yeah. So like our era was like X Games, Jackass, like that kind of shit. Right. And so like it's funny. I've been seeing it go backwards now. There was like this rebellion kind of culture happening, right? Like all of or at least, outside Los Angeles, like we were wearing super baggy clothes, all the I mean,
It's coming back.
it's back, dude. Like I'm watching these kids. I'm like, dude, that's a pair of 36 jeans. You're fucking a 27 waist.
Yeah.
Like what the fuck?
The Jinkos and everything.
Yeah. And like they're wearing extra large shirts and they're like an extra small, And so it's kind of coming back, and so I think that's cool. But we had this we kind of grew up with like this rebellious, fuck the system attitude. I would say probably, I'm inferring here, but like where you grew up and especially in the environment that you grew up, like you were living it, right? You were living this alternative lifestyle. And so like, man, school would be such a contradiction to that. School and like the normal system of like,
The formality
hey, take your SATs and get a really good score and go to some fucking expensive ass school. And you're like, for what, dude?
Yeah.
Like I want to climb and I can climb for free.
Yeah. I just wasn't buying it. And honestly, then seeing the recession happen too just validated my thesis at the time. I was just like, all this like narrative of just this ideological norms are just like not actually guaranteed to work out the way everyone's saying it is. So it gave me even more fuel to just like check out of that and check into what I want. And that was adventure.
Yeah. Cool.
And I don't,
So you weren't really a troubled kid. It was like the perception that you like, well, I mean, you were alternative or you were contrarian to like the system.
Yeah. I mean, I think like I was a good person, but I was definitely a troublemaker.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
yeah, cool.
Sweet. You probably had more fun than everybody else.
I had a lot of fun.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess you'll tell us about Alaska. It'd be fun if my uncle's in town. We should definitely have him on the podcast. My uncle, I don't know him well just because he's lived in Alaska his whole life.
Oh, cool.
But from what my mother's told me, after high school or college, I think it was college, he went to Fairbanks, Alaska, and he hasn't come back since.
Wow.
So,
Fairbanks,
he's
right on.
in his 70s now. So
Nice.
yeah. But you can tell us about Alaska. I was just.
So you get out of you finish high school, continuation.
Yeah.
Like, and then what do you do for a handful of years?
It quickly turned into Alaska, like really quickly. I knew that was what I was going to do. I had been, in the Camp 4 scene in Alaska, in Yosemite. And Camp 4 is, for those who don't know, Camp 4 is like this little ghetto campground in Yosemite, very like ran down little campground where it was in many ways in those days the center of global climbing. And so it was just this community that was always in flux of people coming from all over the world. People were coming in to try their skills at climbing in Yosemite. And so it was just this very global community and a lot of people living this seasonal work lifestyle, because that's really how people can get good at something like climbing. Is you can't just do it on the weekends. You have to be
day after day
on site in an incredible area, and you have to be living there. And so when people come to Camp 4, they're there for 7-8 weeks, and you need to be a seasonal worker or something to do that. And so through that, I started kind of bumping into the commercial fishing scene. And my grandfather was a commercial fisherman in California, albacore and crab. And, it's something that the ocean has always been part of my life. And so when I started seeing these climbers that were really badass, telling these stories around campfires of, being on the Bering Sea, making $30,000 in 10 days, and then flying straight to Pakistan to put up a first ascent, I'm like, I'm sold. This is what I want to do. And so I just knew
that's cool.
I knew that this is what was going to happen. I had some connections up there, went up to Kodiak, started at a cannery, got into tug and barge, which is like, they move cargo around with a tugboat and a barge and containers. And so got into that and then got into fishing from there. And that just opened up the wildest 10 years of my life for sure.
That sounds awesome. Sounds like you were drawn to that adventure.
Definitely.
And it paid off.
Called to it. Yeah. I think, you know, even as a kid, I was like, I'm either going to become a Navy SEAL or a Bering Sea crab fisherman. And it just, Alaska, the call to the north, it was, I had to listen. I'm glad I did.
Man, if you like the ocean, I don't know what the hell you're doing here.
Yeah, well, it's, you know, I've been coming here for a while. My best friend lives here. We can get into that at some point, but I'm helping him start a business here.
Mm-hmm.
We're co-founding a company, and we're the first locations in Bozeman. And I'd been coming up here, you know, once a year for quite some time to sled ski in Cook City. We take snowmobiles out and get out to areas and then tour up on peaks to ski. And so my eyes were really open to Montana in those years. And so I'm happy to be here for the time that I'm here.
Cool.
Yeah. Anyway, continue with the fishing. Tell us about it.
Yeah.
Well, it's the commercial fishing scene in Alaska is unlike anything anywhere. It is it is full of the most incredible people and some of the most vile people and some of the most soulful people and some of the most dead inside people. And I've worked with them all and I've bonded with them all. And I think that if there's one thing that I take from fishing, is the ability to work with unlikely characters that you would never, ever hang out with on land. Drug addicts, prison, these types of people, and you trust your life to them and you form a bond like that is incredible. And so, you know, I mean, the thing about fishing is like there's like all the boats, right? And then there's like 20% of the boats are incredible. The rest kind of come in and out. And sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad, blah, 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 blah. But there's like this 20%. And I've always referred to it as like the white collar fleet. Like these are the professionals. Mm-hmm. And nobody from California who doesn't have a family member, like you're not coming up there and getting on that 20%. So you got to battle your way through that 80% of bullshit and danger and drama to get into those really good boats. And, you know, it was, there was definitely, those were like the days, or those were the seasons that were really hard, was kind of like making your way up. But turns out, you know, if
you have to prove yourself,
it's a proving ground
that you are reliable and
then continue proving
and competent and whatnot.
And then continue proving that you're good. Cause you know, these people are going up there and they'll make their years living in, 2 months, or, you know, they'll make what a normal person's years living is in 2 months, and they'll do it all year and grind. And so it's a very, like, if anything goes wrong, typically you can only lose one crew member and then like the whole thing shuts down and nobody's making money and everybody's desperate. So like you can't have a weak link, especially on the Bering Sea. Because
when you say lose a crew member, well,
like someone quits or someone gets injured. Okay. Someone dies, you know, these things are always happening up there. It's the real deal. But that's the thing, is you don't want to just let a rando on the team.
Yeah.
Because then all of a sudden what would have been a $50,000 a month is now like a $15,000 a month because, you know, it got messed up.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And you have to put a lot of trust in these people too. Cause I mean, the way that it works is like this operation is running 20 hours a day, 7 days a week with no breaks. And so there's always a point in that time where the lowest person on the totem pole is driving the boat while everyone else sleeps for an hour or two. And so you're trusting your life in so many different ways to every single person on the team. It's a lot like expedition climbing. It's like everyone is equally as important.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
So, yeah, I mean, but I think
that I guess in those kinds of settings, like you can really see, like there's like this, it's tangible about like who's the weak link and where everybody's weaknesses are, right? Like you as an individual might, I don't know, I would imagine like, I don't know, let's just say there's 10 things to get done and you might be really good at 9 of them, but one of them you fucking suck at it and you need to work on it. I don't know. But I would imagine that like that type of a business and that type of an environment, as raw and real as it is, like shows you immediately where the weaknesses are. Yeah.
Well, you can fake your way into it, but you can't fake your way through it. And if you are a fake or you are not pulling your weight, let's just say HR is not going to come to your rescue. Like this is a community of like, it's like old world, you know, there's a lot of violence. There's a lot of things
like
like that.
Get your shit together right this second. Let's go.
It's militant. It's very militant. And the Bering Sea thing is like the special forces of the fishing world, you know. So it's a very high attrition. I think, you know, there's Deadliest Catch says that like it's like 80% fail rate for first year people.
I'm sure, yeah.
But it's something to be very proud of. I mean, you accomplish a big snow crab season or king crab, or even the hardest fishery in the world, by the way, is cod. Up there, the way they fish cod up there, it's like everything you see on Deadliest Catch, same pot, same gear, but twice as fast and way less sleep. And so cod, I thought, was like, this is like the hardest job I can possibly think of as far as like not sleeping and physical endurance. I mean, and that's another thing too that was so cool, is like you would see these people up there, and these are like Olympian athletes. Like, there has been so many athletic feats on the Bering Sea that the world will never know about.
Yeah.
I mean, just like people talk about running an ultra marathon, and I've ran several, and there is nothing like staying up for 72 hours in a storm when you're breaking ice off a boat to survive. And these people are doing it and smiling and chain smoking cigarettes the whole freaking time. Yeah. So
I was going to say,
yeah. So you're like, I can run 100-miler. This is fucking easy.
It feels very similar. Yeah.
Yeah. It makes sense if you run ultras. I was going to ask, how much of the climbing do you think paid off when you got to this world? Just what you
the
learned?
Fishing world?
Yeah.
I think the bravery part, the psychological part, is the only thing that transferred. The physical endurance, it's more of like a CrossFit or like impact sport type endurance, like football, I think. I wouldn't know, but I think it's somewhere in like that level, because you are like slamming your body, pop movements and all this, like, but the psychological part of like the suffering in climbing and alpinism transfers pretty well. Being cold, wet, scared, and having no choice but forward. Like,
yeah, you have to talk yourself through it. Like, I can do this. I can keep going.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's cool too, because you have people around you that are just manning up, you know, stepping up, rising to the occasion. There's just, it really, I don't know, it really is just a test of fortitude. And then also like social navigation too. Like, man, you know, when you've been up that long and maybe the fishing's bad, and you've been up that long, and just like keeping it together and staying positive.
Like, you're pulling, or they're called pots, they're cages, pots.
Yeah, they're pots.
Okay, so you're pulling pots out of the water and nothing's in them, and you're like, fuck.
Oh yeah. You're spending money at that point. Literally, you're spending money. You'll get a bill if you don't catch. You're going to get a fat fuel bill to figure out.
Yeah.
So it's high stakes. It's a gamble, and it's a very mission focused job. And that's what I loved about it. Is like, as soon as you untie from the dock in Dutch Harbor, you're guaranteed some extreme shit every time. There's never like an easy trip.
Yeah.
And if there is an easy trip, you're really paranoid about when it's going to get 500 times worse.
Because you know it's coming.
Yeah. And I think that was just kind of the thing, like, especially because eventually after just a couple of years, I think because I'm an easy person to get along with and was in really good shape at the time, I think I moved up really quick, got into the great communities, family owned boats, and incredible people, and just met these authentic, amazing characters that would be stand-up comedians if they had a chance, you know, like incredible things that you would see people, the way they acted and the way they, you know, the kind of like social dynamics. And I got on with the good people really fast. And just like, that's when you're like, this is an operation. We're a team, and like, we've got each other's backs big time. And you really do. I mean, you wouldn't think twice about risking your life to save your friend in those moments. Your body just does it.
Yeah.
This is that 20% you're speaking of that you got in with.
Yeah. And I mean, this is when you start getting into really good money too. Like, I mean, like if I think about finance, no, this is not, but it's an incredible way, because you have no bills. Like, I lived out of a camper for 10 years. I mean, I had no rent, I had nothing. And so you go out there and you just stack it and you come out and you got nothing but your backpack. And
how many months a year were you doing it?
About 7, which is a lot more than most people. Most people just do salmon and they'll go up there for 2
What were you doing
months.
the other 5 months?
Traveling the world climbing. So I was on a life pattern, an annual cycle where I would go and I'd do my fishing, and then I'd come off the boat and I'd get to my camper and I'd go out somewhere and train climbing, usually Yosemite or Moab. And so I'd fish hard, train hard, and then go hit 1 or 2 big expeditions a year. And an expedition in my mind is you're flying out somewhere really far away with a ton of luggage and you're getting it all out there. You're setting up a base camp and you're doing something big. And a lot of times it's in another country, in Nepal, Africa, Patagonia, or Alaska, which was my favorite place to climb. And so like those sorts of trips take a lot of money. They oftentimes take a lot of logistics and planning. You have to find the right team. You have to get it all together. And so that's why crabbing worked. And through doing that for a decade, I met my best friend here, Paul, who's lived in Bozeman for over 10 years. And we went on insane trips together. And I've met a lot of my closest friends. I hadn't seen them for a long time. And I just got married a few months ago and everyone was at the wedding.
Congrats.
It's really cool to see. Yeah.
Cool.
And so, yeah, it's just kind of like this lifestyle of work hard, train hard, climb hard, repeat. And it was cool. And honestly, it was the last time I had like a full real community feeling in my life. Like I'm working on rebuilding that, but you know, the Alaskan culture, like it was just felt like my people in every way, whether it was fishing or just people, you know, that live in Alaska and live that lifestyle. Like it was just, I don't know, I felt like that was my people. And then the climbing people were that on steroids. And so that was just the life pattern I did for quite a long time.
Awesome.
What kind of shape were you in for climbing when you got done a season of?
Oh, way better than I am right now, guys. I'll tell you that.
Where you're like, man, I'm in the best shape possible.
Well, you get off the crab boat and you feel like you can punch through a fucking brick wall. Like nothing's going to stop you. A freaking bomb could go off 15 feet away and you wouldn't even flinch. Like just that extreme, loud, intense spray, you know, ice, and you just get off and you're just psychologically so calm. I'm just like, and actually there's something that I reflect on sometimes is like, and I actually relate. I can see how post-traumatic stress coming out of combat is a very, very, very real thing. I come off the Bering Sea, and every time I'd get to Anchorage, like the world just moves so slow. It was like molasses. Because you go from like 3 or 4 months out there where it's just like, girl, I gotta go as fast as we can. Come on. And you know, waves are exploding and you're falling and it's just intense. And then you get from that little plane to the big airport and everyone's just waddling around like half speed, if that.
Yeah.
And I remember it always would take a while. Like it was that.
Because you're living at this intensity for a really long time.
And everything you do is fast.
There's never a break.
And everything is fast as you can, always, for months. And then you get into the like molasses of society. And it was like every time without fail.
That's a really good way to put it.
Yeah, that's a good phrase, the molasses
of
society.
Well, so like, did you have a hard time slowing down and like?
Definitely.
Yeah.
And you know,
you're like, what the fuck? Why isn't everybody doing shit?
Yeah. And I mean, like things that would be like a humorous way of communicating with your fellow crabbers is like not accepted and probably right. It's a good thing it's not, but like you could say something edgy or something punk ass to your friend, like, come on, hurry the fuck up. What are you doing? Yeah. You can't do that to, you know, your girlfriend or your best friend who's like never been, you have to like really kind of hold your tongue and kind of reintegrate. And it was extreme. And then also too, like eventually I got off the boat and integrated into a completely different type of life. And, it took me a while to like, kind of just adapt. I think from just like, and not just crabbing, but also climbing. It's just this adrenalized society of just people that are like so laser focused on things that are so dangerous. And it took a while to kind of reintegrate. Running, actually, trail running, I credit that to almost my only ability to be a normal person is because it just that anaerobic kind of endurance kind of just drains me down and makes me slower.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Yeah. I was just thinking when you say that 4 months on that boat, no matter how intense it is, if you do it long enough, it's going to feel normal at some point. That's your new bar normal. Like, and then you come back off of that to society, and that's gotta be you remember when Carol was saying that she lived in Japan for a year and then she came back here.
Like a culture shock.
Yeah. And just the like sort of the effort that everyone, like everything seems so easy for her here, but just because they're academically their academic standards are so much higher. So when she came back here to the US,
she was having to learn everything in another language. So she was putting in so much effort to do all just like the basics. When she got back here, she's like, this is fucking easy.
Yeah, you kind of
That's nice.
probably the
She's like, everything's in English. This is fucking ridiculously easy.
the bummer is like you're saying you're not in good shape now is kind of like the gym too. If you work out all the time and then you stop for a while, you can lose it so fast.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like you have to maintain it to some sense.
Yeah.
That resilience, I guess, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. Yeah. You kind of do want to stay hardened, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm trying my best. This injury's kind of set me back, but I'll pull through.
All right. So 10 years of being in Alaska on a boat and also climbing around the world.
Yeah.
Then what? Then what do you transition to?
Well,
and how'd you come to the determination to make the transition?
Yeah, it was, so those years when I was on the boat, like I said, I was like, I could form these bonds with these pretty extreme characters, but there was always sort of something missing. And I think it was intellectual engagement in a certain way. And not to say that these folks aren't very intellectual. They know a lot more about the tides and what's going on in the bottom of the ocean than any of us do. But I've always been a nerdy guy, always been kind of interested in things like economics and policy and just all that kind of stuff, history and philosophy. And just, so for that whole decade, actually, I was listening to podcasts and audiobooks because podcasts started to kind of emerge during that time. So like, I think 2010, 11, somebody showed me this podcast, Dan Carlin's Hardcore History. I don't know if you're familiar with Dan.
I've heard of it. Yep.
Yeah. So this is like
I've heard a couple episodes.
OG podcasts.
Yeah. I mean, if you're listening to podcasts in 10, 11, 12, you're an early adopter. Yeah.
This is like when there really was only like, 100 podcasts out there. And that podcast turned into a bunch of other ones. The list is huge, but it went from there to Sam Harris and all these different things. And it just kind of started to catalyze this just general curiosity about academics and systems thinking and trying to deepen my understanding of certain frameworks for making sense of the world. And so I developed this intellectual hunger over many years. And in Audible, the audiobook thing, like on the boat, I'm always one headphone in, powering through all these different, mostly nonfiction kind of stuff. But
hold on a second. Let's pause there for a second. So you're working on the fucking boat. There's all this shit going on and you got a fucking headphone in. Like,
it depends what position on deck you're doing at the moment. But yeah, if I'm on the rail, which is a position on a crab boat, the rail is the guy who throws the hook out in the water. No, I'm not listening to anything.
No, but that's awesome that you were able, like, just the matter of fact that there's all that stuff going on and you can still be like, nah, I got one more thing. And you're half, I might imagine, like sometimes you're half-assed listening, but it's still like, you're like, yeah, I'm enjoying this.
Yeah. And, you would hear something really cool. And then in the evening, when you get a few hours to lay down, you'd go back, re-listen to it. Whoa,
Yeah.
Just getting this general curiosity. And I think also another thing too, is I went on a climbing trip when I was 20 to China. And I was in China for 3 or 4 months and, I was doing this overland, taking trains and cars and stuff to get to everywhere. And I crossed China and went into Tibet and is a huge trip by myself. And I started seeing, this is around 2008. And I started seeing, I was witnessing that the Chinese were building entire cities at once. Not like, it started as a town.
Yeah,
and it's a city. And I was seeing these construction projects where they would build an entire city, build an entire suburb, inject people into it, and turn the city on. And I'm like, what is this? And how does this happen? And it must come from economics. And so I started kind of getting really curious about
company,
economics.
Evanongrade, does that ring a bell?
Oh yeah. The real estate collapse over there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like the large,
debt financed real estate. Yeah.
Yeah. That's right. That's the right name. It's like
it is Evergrande.
Evergrande.
It's Evergrande.
Yeah, Evergrande.
And but I think that's where my original curiosity with economics came from, was that trip to China. And
you're like, how the fuck is this working?
Turns out it's called development economics, heavily financed and subsidized by the government there. But it was still just like, wow, you can like, what is this? And so it created this curiosity. So I kind of always tuned into economics over the years too, and just trying to understand it. And so, that's kind of, I'm going back to say that like over the years, this hunger and curiosity for academics and sciences and things like that continued to grow and grow and grow. And then at the same time, between 2015 and, I would say 2013 and 2017, I lost a bunch of good friends in climbing related accidents in 6-month intervals over a series of 4 or 5 years. It just kept happening. And these are people that, you really connect with someone when you push yourself in an environment like climbing. And these are people that you had these really deep connections and admiration, and they were really important to me. And,
you love them.
Yeah. And so when all these people are there and then all of a sudden they're not there, and your favorite thing in the world is what's taken them. And it just, I started to get really contemplative after that. So it was, I think it was a mixture of intellectual hunger and tragedy that ultimately led me to consider, what's next. And in particular, there was one fatality of a guy named Hayden Kennedy, who actually he died here in Montana. And I won't get into it too much. People can look it up online. It's a really tragic story, but he was someone who was really important to me and a very, very much an inspiration of mine. And that happened when I was on the Bering Sea. And it was during a particularly bad weather cycle. And I had to process all that while standing on the rail of a crab boat in 50-foot waves, and alone, really, because my friends didn't really know him or anything. And so I was out there just having to process through that. And I got to a point where I was like, I need to rug pull this whole lifestyle right now. I need a serious change because I'm dying inside. The depression is getting worse and worse by the day. Mm-hmm. And it's just, there's no way out of this other than some sort of major pivot. And I just made up my mind. And at the time I was listening to an audible of a book called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, Amos Tversky.
That's so funny. Anyway, that just came up in my life a couple of days ago. I read 100 pages of that book and had to put it down because it was fucking hard to read.
Well, I was plowing through that book during that season. I got really, like I said, I love economics and whatnot. And Amos Tversky was a professor at Cornell University. And I'd never heard of Cornell, didn't give a flying fuck about Cornell. But at the time when I decided, whoa, I need to fucking change my life right now, and I think I'm just going to go to school at 30 or at 29, I had just read that he taught that lab, that he had passed away, but it just kept coming up. And then I would go to the appendix of the book, and I would look at the footnotes or things like that. And it was Cornell paper. And I was like, I'm going to quit crabbing and I'm going to go to college at an Ivy League university. And I've never taken a college course in my life. I was expelled from high school, and I'm going to do this. And we finished off the crab season, got the boat to Kodiak. I walked through the snow, got a taxi, went to the airport and bought a ticket at the counter in Kodiak for New York, and flew to New York, went and walked around on campus, said, I'm going to do this, and made a big change. And obviously you can't just go from being a derelict crab fisherman to that school. I had to go to a junior college, get a 4.0 and then write a compelling letter.
Where'd you go to junior college?
This little community college in downtown Seattle. Well, maybe not downtown, a couple miles out of downtown. And I figured Seattle would be a good halfway point between Alaska maritime life and city life. And so, yeah,
How long were you in Seattle?
That was actually the hardest part about the whole fucking thing. Yeah.
Was being in Seattle?
Not Seattle, no. Being at this kind of rundown community college, taking English 1 with a bunch of 15-year-old running start students. And, I'm just in there and it was
that would be really hard to transition into be this extreme hard ass environment to this coddled junior college.
Yeah. And I kind of I staggered into that situation too. There was a bunch of things I had to do because I have a very addictive personality. And at the time I had a really nice camper on a really nice truck, and I was living out of it. And I was like, if I don't sell this thing right now, I'm going to quit whatever I try to do. Cause it's so easy to just dip out of here and go skiing in Montana or go to Indian Creek, Utah. And so I literally just canceled my whole 10-year way of life and then moved to an apartment in Seattle. And because I knew it was going to be so painful to be with all these kids, like I was like, I'm not going to talk to anybody. I'm not going to do anything. I'm shutting down all my social media. I'm going dark. And my little apartment was like a CIA black site. And all I did was study as hard as I could. I went to 5 days of tutoring a week because I sucked at math. And I just grinded and got the grades I needed. And boom, got in. And we drove across we got in the truck, drove, and actually, when I got to New York, school had just started, and I actually lived in a Safeway parking lot out of my truck for about 2 weeks before I could find a house. It was like dirtbag, scholar kind of intersection there. It was pretty wild.
That's cool that you noticed that about yourself, that you had to, I guess, make those changes and like sell the camper, because you would have been enticed, or I guess enticed to like go, I guess drop out of class or whatever.
Well,
it
was that, and what was going on, and I might be jumping ahead by going into the school stuff. I don't know, but what was going on at the time was I had discovered a new rock climbing area. Well, I had discovered some new rocks in an area that had been discovered before, but no one was climbing in Alaska. And it was outside of Haines, Alaska, which is where I lived a lot of the time I was there. And I had gotten into this like obsession with this place, and nothing else mattered. Life didn't even matter, actually. I just wanted to keep climbing this one place. And I'll show you guys pictures of it, but it's like Yosemite Valley, but over ice. Everything is pretty much unnamed. There's only been like most of the stuff no one's touched. And there was one pilot who could get you out there. And he's one of the major mentors of my life. It's a guy named Drake Olson. And if anyone is ever in Alaska and they want to blow their mind and change their life in a matter of an hour, go fly with Drake. This guy is the master. He's the best mountain pilot ever. And he is the most passionate guy ever. And I could talk for hours about this guy. He was he was a professional race car driver for Porsche, had an incredible racing career, and then just like ripcorded out of that whole life, similar to like what I did. He like completely quit professional racing, moved into a water tower in Haines, Alaska, this house that was made into a water tower, bought some planes. And now he's just kind of like this mythical legend to a lot of people up there. He's a curmudgeon. He's pretty heavy metal. He's in his 60s. He's got a mullet. He's just this incredible dude. And we formed this incredible bond. And he helped me open and discover this new climbing area where, we were out there doing first ascents. And I think I had developed this unhealthy obsession with this area in Alaska that was really intense. And it was another thing. That's why I had to sell the camper, because the camper is what facilitated that. I would go up there to live in a campground and fly out on these big trips. And I had to cut the cord because it just kept calling. Mm-hmm. It was like
you were fully addicted to it.
Oh, yeah. So that's the camp. That's why the camper really had to go.
Yeah. Got it. Okay. Okay. So how long were you? Seattle was a couple of years, year and a half.
I did 2 years of school in 1 year.
Okay.
Actually, in a little less than a year.
So just fully went all the way in. And
maxing out credits. Yeah.
I'm going to do as much as I can to get the hell out of here.
Yeah.
Okay. So then you move back then you go to New York.
Mm-hmm. Upstate. Yeah.
Yep. So you go to Cornell and study finance. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Let's go into that. Like, what was that like? How was that transition?
Yeah.
And by the way, one of the things I think is really cool, I'd like to jump in, is like, if everybody's listening, there's like 6 listeners out there. You don't have to be good at math to do finance. You have to figure out how math works so you can do finance.
I think that's a good way of putting it. Yeah. Or you can start out bad and just crush yourself until you're good.
There you go.
Which is pretty much what happened in my case. I was doing like a lot of tutoring. Mm-hmm. Like it was a grind, and it was all math. I was pretty good at everything else, but it was math. Math was like a huge part of getting into that business program, and things are possible. And if you fail, if you don't get the grade you want, retake the freaking class and just keep punishing yourself until you get what you want.
Yeah.
So going into this Cornell thing, like people talk about culture shock, but I don't think it quite encompasses what I was feeling at Cornell. It was
You're like the complete opposite person of a Cornell student.
Oh yeah. And you could say opposite, that's for sure, but 10, 11 years older than your cohort, it's a lot. Yeah. And it was a lot. And so the only people I really talked to were professors my age and PhD students my age. And that was kind of like the little bit of community I had there. And of course, Cornell's super expensive and my budget was very, very limited. So there was this like kind of Buddhist like experience of like having nothing to pull it off. And, a lot of miracles happened to make it work. And I'm really glad I shot my shot, but either way, I needed to do it in half the time because there was no way I was going to be able to pay for the amount of time you're supposed to be there. So it was 20 credits and it was summers and winters. And I just burned through it. It was the weirdest thing I've ever done in my life and the hardest, by far the hardest. Starting a company is pretty hard, but this was more like an identity crisis than being a founder. This was like, the school thing was like really hard. And luckily though, right when I got there, I noticed that there was 2 other really burned out looking 30-year-old dudes there when I came in.
That's not helpful.
And I was like, hey, what's up? What are you guys doing? They were like, highly decorated Navy SEAL sniper and like an Army Ranger who got a letter from a general because he was such a badass. And like, luckily I had those 2 dudes to kind of at least be near me so that I could see that I wasn't completely alone. But, crab fisherman coming into an undergraduate Ivy League program, it was pretty wild. There
was a lot of things that like have nothing to do with school or the classes and that kind of work that were stacked against you, right? That you were 10 years older than everybody else. Your brain was like completely, probably like on a completely different level.
And not to mention, like, I was
just
going
your
there.
Values are way different.
Yeah, my values are way different. I wanted to learn the dark arts of finance and business because I felt like, I can get in with that skill set and maybe that network, I can get in and create something that's sort of punk rock, but in the business world, something that's kind of like, unconventional. Mm-hmm. And that was my goal, is like entrepreneurship eventually. But like, if I'm going to be here and I'm going to learn something in this business program, I'm going to concentrate on finance because you have to talk to investors to do things in business. And I wanted to kind of knock it out of the park. So I just focused on finance. And so, yeah, I was a little bit of an outlier. It was a culture shock because on the East Coast and in these prestigious institutions, you get a lot of careerism. So people, like, their entire identity is wrapped around their title or like the title they want, and that was new to me. It was very much against what I grew up on the Central Coast around, or what I climbed around for, or fished around. And like, this was like a whole different thing. And so kind of biting my tongue, or maybe even being open-minded to that way of life in a way. It took a lot of discipline. There was times where I just wanted to like say something crazy to blow everyone's minds, but I bit my tongue. Well, for the most part, I did say some stuff that was jaw-dropping to some people. Yeah. I wanted to keep that corporate like fervor in check a little bit. And so, I had my moments that were really funny. And people, but eventually towards the end of the program,
I imagine your professors too, right? Because there's like a lot of professors, right? They're professors like their entire career. Most of them don't work in the private sector. And so then, you're like, okay, like this whole thing is theory unless you're using it.
Yeah.
Right. And so then anyway, I guess I would imagine that you're like, who the fuck is this guy talking in front of the fucking class?
There was some classes like that for sure. But I think that like my nerdy passion for learning economics and policy and using these frameworks to kind of look at society and make sense. Like, they saw that and they were just like, whoa. And so like, that was like the only times I would get invited out in the evening as like a professor or a PhD. They're like, you're so different, but you're so interested in what we're interested in. And so I think a lot of people saw that, and I was caught off guard by that because I wasn't expecting that. I mean, obviously there was plenty of the people, in a lot of ways, it's like a meat grinder into Goldman Sachs, and like, it's a conveyor belt kind of thing that's kind of conditioning people onto Wall Street. So, I think that they were kind of, wow, like this dude's different. And a lot of people gave me time to, and I was invited into these cool research institute things where my nerdy heart was soaring. And a lot of times it was pretty freaking euphoric. I couldn't believe I was there. And part of these, like watching these panel discussions with really genius people in AI and tech. And
what a contradiction to where you were earlier, or just a few years earlier. And so like, that was probably in and of itself really exciting of like, wait, how did I get in this room?
Totally. It was really validating, and, probably not in a good way. In some ways I was like, it was the first time I'd been part of an organization, actually. I've never really worked for companies. I remember
you're like an independent contractor
with that. Well, I'm just a commercial fishing operations, 5 people, it's not like it's a corporate owned vessel or something. It's like some old timer owns this badass 140-foot crab boat, and you work on it, and like it's a small group. It's always been small groups. And so I think the Cornell thing, I got in there and I kind of was like, well, it's the first time I've been accepted into something kind of prestigious, and it was cool. I think, sometimes I let it get to my head a little bit, but
that's all right.
Get through it. And I lived in the most ran down part of town. I lived next to the tracks in Ithaca. Like anytime a train would go by when I was studying, there was a sewer pipe that ran underneath the train track and underneath my house, and my whole house would start shaking whenever a train went by. And I had kind of a schizophrenic alky situation on the house above me, and like a domestic violent thing going on with the next door neighbor. And I was like I never had visitors from Cornell. I didn't live on campus and live anywhere near campus. I had to, I was off very humble means to pull this off. And so it was kind of this cool juxtaposition of like this ivory tower shit, and then like this hard hitting, I'm hanging out on the porch with this lady. She's smoking cigarettes, talking about her husband in prison. And it was kind of cool. It was a trippy experience.
It sounds awesome.
So where did
it's a really cool story, I guess.
It sounds like it sounds like a great movie to watch.
It does sound like a great movie to watch.
Yeah, where did this lead? So you graduated out of there. How much time did you spend there?
So I did all of undergrad in 2 years and 9 months. I was there for there for about a year. Then COVID hit, and I moved to the Eastern Sierras to a little cabin in the desert at the foot of the Sierras, and finished off Cornell there, which COVID was the best thing that happened in my entire freaking college experience. As soon as they're like, oh, you can go remote, I was just like, thank God. I went from like living in this weird kind of academic thing to like living in the Eastern Sierras next to Bishop. Are you familiar with Bishop?
I am, yeah. Grew up going to Bishop a lot.
Great, yeah. So climbing and trail running and backcountry skiing while getting a very high-end business degree and making a huge network. It was a dream come true. Yeah.
That's so interesting to be able to like hang out in Bishop and go to college.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
It was rad.
Yeah, it's so funny your perspective on COVID versus what most people's probably were.
It worked out.
This is the best thing to happen to me.
Yeah.
Worked out great.
Yeah, if you can get a college degree and hang out in the mountains, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I was in a little town called Big Pine, which is just south of Bishop by 15 minutes, and it is just like it's a native reservation and a truck stop. That's all it is. So you don't even get like the Sprinter vans down there. It's just like it was wild. And the mountains there, it's called the Palisades. It's all part of the Sierras, but it's a cirque called the Palisades, and it's just so sick. Incredible.
Yeah, it's definitely a cool area. The whole Eastern Sierras are really cool.
Yeah.
So what do you do with this degree?
I got into private equity.
Okay. That was pretty much straight out of...
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, I think your life has like come full circle, man. You went from getting kicked out of school, being this like punk rock kid to, yeah, bro, I'm in private equity. Not a big deal.
Yeah. So private equity is labeled as a very evil industry, and I think that's pretty fair to say. I mean, I think that it's kind of like it's sort
transactional.
And then extractive. But I think that that's like, like all things, there's a range and there's complexity. And I think proportionally, like, sure, maybe like 60% of all private equity is pretty extractionist or like kind of strange incentives that are just not geared towards the consumer or to the business owner or the employees.
Can you explain some examples?
Oh, sure. I mean, private equity in healthcare is a no-go in my mind. Like, we shouldn't be going out there and buying healthcare companies and raising prices on patients and insurers. I don't think that's good.
You're saying that private equity should not be legally allowed to invest in healthcare companies.
I'm not saying they shouldn't legally be able to. I'm just saying that's not what I would ever play in. Like, if, I don't know about the
Okay, so that's a no-go for you.
Philosophically.
Yeah.
Or morally, or
Exactly. Yeah. No, I'm not doing that. But let me give you an example of how private equity could be nefarious in, say, like a community like Bozeman. If I'm an analyst and I'm coming up with a thesis, I got to think of like, okay, what is like a really mission critical business? And there's a lot of them out there, but a good one would be like plumbing, electrical, and HVAC. Like, it's hotter than hell here in the summer. It's colder than hell in the winter. This is a place where you have to have a climate controlled environment, or you can't live in that structure. Basically, you could you could live off grid in a cabin with a fire, but like in town.
Yeah,
right?
I gotcha.
And so a private equity analyst making a thesis would be like, okay, that seems like a pretty good industry. And I'm going to look at how many businesses there are in Bozeman. Let's say Bozeman in like the early 2000s, not now, but like early 2000s, you could look and there might be 20 HVAC companies.
Sure.
And so it's fragmented. There's not a huge player.
Yeah.
So there's all these little players. And so what someone might do is they'll come into Bozeman and they'll buy one or two HVAC companies, merge them together, make a bigger one, and then
buy one or two,
buy a little stack of the rest of them and pull them in, integrate them. And then what they'll do is there'll still be a lot of competitors out there, but this one's bigger now. And so they get better supplier contracts of like equipment and all the materials. And then they'll go out and they'll put up billboards along the highway that say, we're going to give you a $5,000 signing bonus to come work for us. And so now they start pulling talent from the competitors. They no longer got to buy the competitors. They just start siphoning talent. And then now you have a very big company with a lot of the talent in the area. And now you can respond to a broken HVAC company in an hour. And the other people, well, we got a few jobs ahead of you. We're not going to be able to get in there. Like, go get a hotel room until we can get to you. And so now you can respond a lot faster. And now that you can do that, you can start raising prices, because it's really not an option for a family of four to live in a heated up 100-degree apartment or a frozen apartment. Like, you need to. And so that's the mission criticality, is now if you can be there in an hour and not a week, now you can price it. You can raise prices.
I can be there in an hour.
And you can start raising prices. And then if people can't afford it, then you can start offering financing and then taking interest on top of that. And that's what you see in a lot of towns across the US right now, is we've undergone a massive consolidation event of home services. And you start to get these multi-billion-dollar consolidators that are taking in all the HVAC companies and raising prices on the consumer, adding to the inflation issue. And so like, that's an example of where consolidation can be pretty nefarious. And, it's something that's happened in the past few years, and it's kind of, you get to a point where it's too hard to compete against that. And so the local people have had their talent taken away. They can't price low enough, because you can have a lot of pricing power. You can go low for, say you consolidate a bunch of companies in one locality. You can also go way low on your price. And now that flushes everyone out. And then you pull back on the lever. Like, these are all kind of like playbooks of some different things in private equity. So yeah, those are some examples. You can do the same thing with healthcare, right? Like a life-saving like ambulances, for instance, got consolidated by Wall Street a long time ago. So a lot of these ambulance companies, they might not say corporate ambulance on it. They might keep the old logo, but the company is still owned by a parent company. And so one parent company might own 1,000 operations in the ambulance space. And so what does that what happens then? Like life flight ambulances, like these are things that someone is in the most vulnerable position that they could be in. They're worried for their lives. And so it's really non-negotiable. They're going to send an ambulance in, and then your insurance gets billed, you get billed, and they just have pricing power. So like, that's why I think healthcare and some of these things, it's a kind of a no-go for me. And you can see it. And I mean, the economy is replete with examples of where private equity has gone, taking a dark kind of approach to things. But from my point of view and what I've done in PE, I'm really kind of a big picture thinker, or like, in climbing, when you're expedition climbing, you might see a photograph of some unclimbed tower on a glacier and you're like, you can see yourself doing it. You can see the line, you can see yourself doing it. You can think about landing the plane and where the equipment's going to go. And you can really start to envision this thing before you ever do it. And that visualization practice is something that's very common in extreme sports and probably fighting and things like that. Private equity called to me because I could think about a strategy. I could think about a play, and then that's kind of the hypothesis. And then you go validate the hypothesis through market research. And you're like, okay, I see how we could go buy a backup generator company that does backup power for theme parks, right? Like, cause you can't have people getting stuck upside down on a roller coaster. So you need to have a backup generator and a power outage. And so like, you like go buy one of these big ones in Orlando, and then we can start buying other ones and kind of piecing them together. And just the thought process of making that play really called to me. And then the coolest part about the job when I was doing it that I really loved is like, now you got to start contacting CEOs, contacting founders, and talking to these people and getting smart on the industry. And like that kind of exposure to management teams and understanding how to scale a company was just super thrilling to me. And I learned a ton in the years that I was doing this, and saw some things I didn't like, saw some stuff that was awesome. Saw founders of companies our age walk away with $50 million for selling their company that they'd worked their whole life building. You see these huge payouts and these huge rewards for entrepreneurs. That was really awesome. And, you get to then once you buy a company and you start scaling it, like you get to be on the ground floor as a private equity investor. Like the CEO works for the firm. So like all those executives that everyone thinks is the top of the food chain, they're actually answering to their investors, and private equity is that. And so I thought it was really fun and cool. And I still, I enjoyed the work. It was cool. It's a grind. I mean, you're working 80-hour weeks. It's super gnarly hours. Because of the transactional nature, you have to keep chasing. But yeah, I mean, and then I saw some just incredibly smart people in Palo Alto where I was doing this, like just really and like humbling and really cool to see the way that people think through this stuff and the math behind it and the technology, like infusing technology into an old legacy company and seeing what happens. Like it was just really cool to see. And like you'd be in a room just like this with a bunch of people around a table, and you'd have a 30-minute conversation that in an hour was about to affect like 200 people in an organization. We're making a strategy change. We're going to start developing a new product. Like we need to, and so you would see these things that would then, and it was just cool. It was really fun, and it taught me more about business than probably school did.
Yeah, you probably got to look into how the world really works, in a sense. Yeah,
you start to look at the business world or like companies around, like, and the way that founders think. Element, I see you have an Element there. James was actually, we just gave him a walkthrough of our facility we're building here, and he's a venture capital guy. And he was talking to us about.
Is he the founder of the company or something?
James Murphy. Yeah. He's an awesome dude. Super cool. And it was, a lot of his strategy thinking, a lot of his strategic thinking and his vision comes, I assume, from his years in venture capital, which is also similar to private equity, but a different strategy. So just scaling companies and building these things and making an impact. I liked it. It was like climbing, right? Where like you could look at El Capitan and just be like, I'm going to rage up that thing right now. It's a big, mighty thing in front of me, and it's a huge challenge. And like, it's just big. I think I've always been attracted to just like big stuff.
Something that's super
hard and like, yeah, makes an impact, I guess.
Yeah.
Sounds like you were very primed for the workload with the crab fishing.
Yeah.
The 80-hour weeks.
Yeah.
Right up your alley.
Yeah. That and like probably the determination not to quit.
Yeah. It was exciting. It actually kind of just activated like an old part of me that I was like, oh yeah, there that is,
Yeah.
I don't know, I kind of liked it. I mean, being a workaholic has obviously got its drawbacks, but it's, if you like doing it, then.
Well, yeah, it can get addicting, and that addiction can be a problem too.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely.
It's cool to see you make that connection from climbing to private equity.
The visualization part of it. Yeah. Well, that's the thing about climbing too, is it's really like you could be the strongest. You could do 1,000 pull-ups And
if
you can't see yourself climbing this crack 5,000 or 500 feet off the ground, then it's never going to happen. You have to visualize yourself doing it. You literally have to see it in your mind before you ever touch it. And I think that's a skill set that climbing definitely taught me. Also, climbing taught me how to live with very little too, scarcity and not needing a lot to do big things and making those sacrifices and stuff.
Yeah.
So
that's a good reminder.
Yeah, when you're in private equity, are you helping structure these deals to an extent? Just say, hey, here's all my data, here's my research. This is why we should.
So that was my job.
Yep.
And then you have the execution team, which actually structures the deal. And this is when you've got a ton of lawyers on it, and you're looking at like how this thing will vest, how the deal will vest, how founders will be paid out. Like there's certain things where like you don't want to get sold a shitty company, right? So you might make the founder stay around for 3 years and do what's called an earnout. Like that deal structure, that all that financy stuff typically falls on the execution team. I was in thesis generation. So like I'm doing more like market research, putting together an idea, and then coming into a room of a bunch of heavies and telling them like, hey, I think this is a good idea. And you have about, 15 minutes to present it. And then, it's get ready for critical feedback, because these guys they've been in the game for 30 years and they know if your idea is good or not pretty quickly. And it was a thrill. That was a thrill because it's a new skill set for me, right? Like I said, like you're not having to present and be sociable and well-spoken on a crab boat. There's a lot of performance pressure. If you throw the hook and you don't hit the line, then the captain's going to, eviscerate you vocally over the loud hailer. And, there's performance pressure, which prepared me for sure, but it's nothing like being smooth. And
how did you make that transition from kind of maybe being, and maybe you weren't, but I'm going to assume that you picked up a few of these things. Like how did you make a transition from being kind of like rough around the edges to presentable?
Slowly, and tried as hard as I could. It was hard. I just had to do a full behavioral check, because in crabbing and climbing.
How did you do that? I mean, the fact that you just said I had to do a full behavioral check, I asked the question and didn't even realize that would be a thing, but yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. Well, in extreme sports.
I got an extra one if you want one.
I'm good, actually. Thank you though. Maybe on my way out. In climbing, commercial fishing, and just in Alaska in general, this is call out culture. This is like a proving ground, and like you either don't talk to, like, you don't need to talk the talk. You just walk the walk. Your actions prove for you.
Mm-hmm.
And like, if you don't do it, you're going to get called out and someone's going to fucking tell you.
Yep.
You're going to get lit up. And I was around that for so long that just became normalized in my life, and almost seemed like the polite way to handle yourself in a way. And
definitely became normal.
Yeah. And like that pilot Drake that I was telling you about, I've gotten more ass chewings from that guy. And I appreciate every single one. And then these captains, man, on the freaking Bering Sea, just vile. Not all of them, but I've worked for some that just abusive. Because, the thing about a crab boat, I don't know if we so the crab boats I worked on, the ones you see on Deadliest Catch, the wheelhouse is in the back on the stern. So picture a ship. The wheelhouse is back here. The bow is right here. The deck is in between. You work in the deck. The guy is 40 feet up there looking out a window with a microphone, screaming at people for 20 hours, 30 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours. Like, you go on these big pushes and this guy is chewing you alive. And then everyone else on deck is as well.
With literally a microphone.
Yeah. Oh, just the shit that I wouldn't even say it on the air here. But it was just the things that and so just the whole culture of Alaska, even the best and most well-intended people, it's like they're going to call you on your shit. And in a corporate or professional white-collar environment, there's a more eloquent way of doing that and controlling yourself and keeping your composure, actually. And it's an important skill set that I've acknowledged is like equally as important as, giving someone what they deserve. Like, there's an eloquent way to do it. And I think that's what I learned the most at the last PE firm I worked at. I worked with these two incredible, legendary investors in Menlo Park, Palo Alto. And these guys are in their late 50s, very successful. And the way that they controlled tense environments in the room, you know, because if a CEO is not delivering or things like that, like it's their job to let them know. And just watching them do that as a fly on the wall taught me a ton about kind of the control and strategy of communicating things, like especially around underperformance.
Because they still communicated it, but they like took in all those other factors all at the same time and like executed that same, I guess, maybe acute level of communication, but in a much more eloquent way. Is that what you're kind of getting at?
Yeah. And almost scarier in a way.
Okay.
Yeah. Because it's like so polite and so well delivered.
Anything that you specifically remember? Like an example or a phrase that they used?
So the thing about private equity is it's all majorly non-disclosure. So just in case someone listened to this, I don't want to be talking about what goes on in the behind the walls. But picture it like, you know, you're getting told that your career is on the line, but it was very politely. And they're giving you the ways to keep everything on the rails, but you better do it. And, you know, it's serious. It's, I don't know what's more serious. Like, on the Bering Sea, like they're saying things so that the operation stays safe enough that we're not all going to get killed. In private equity, they're saying things like, if you mess this up, it's $150 million that's going to burn up in the air in 1 quarter. And then they give a nice little pregnant pause and everyone in the freaking room gets it. Don't be that guy. Don't make the mistakes. And it's scary. It was humbling. I don't know. Like, I don't know what's worse, burning 150 million or losing your leg. I don't know. It's just, if you get what I'm saying, though, it's a composed way of like letting someone know that what time it is. And when I got into this sort of institutionalized, sort of corporatized kind of business world, I couldn't really, like, I needed to figure out a way to like become more subdued or just communicate smoother. And so a lot of that just came from not communicating at all and just watching everyone else and kind of be the last one to say something. Just, I needed time to learn. These people were, you know, a lot of, especially the MBA students and stuff, like they've spent a lot of time working with people in a social job environment, which I just had no experience with at all at the time.
So this behavioral check you did, any specific strategies? Or were you just like super hyper aware of like your actions?
I think imposter syndrome was kind of the catalyst of it, where I was just like, whoa, like I can't just say some rugged thing because they're not going to find it funny. And even though and
you were the new guy
looked a lot different than everyone, just looked different. I don't know how else to put it. Like,
you dressed differently.
I was more weathered. I just kind of, but
yeah, you're like, yeah, dude, I've been out of the ocean for years.
Yeah. I think it was a slow integration, and I luckily didn't blow it, you know, especially to, you know, during the time, I mean, it's probably still heavily intense in these environments, but this was, you know, 2018, 2019, 2020, it was a pretty charged political environment.
Sure.
There's a lot of gender relation stuff going on. There's a lot of, you know, just stuff like that, where I was just like, I felt like being like this rugged older male in the program, like who has a sharp tongue, and I don't know. This is really awesome. Let's go into this.
I can relate when I moved to the Seattle area after I left the farm I grew up on. And I'm like working for a big corporation. They have an HR department. I've never, like, similar to you, never been part of anything. And I'm like, I'm going to have to watch myself on every, I'm like there's a million things that could go wrong very easily. It's and it's going to be something that comes out of my mouth or something I do. I'm used to being on a farm. There's no rules.
100%.
We did, like, just like being on the boat. You're doing what you can do to be part of the team to get the job done.
Yeah.
And you don't you're not eloquent about how you say things or do things.
Yeah.
And that transition.
Well, and just culturally, like working on a farm, and I honestly, I think farming and fishing are very similar. You're producing food. You're living with the elements.
We're in a dairy, so it's 7 days a week. There's not a day off. Or
these are very similar industries, actually. And you're trying to get a yield of dairy or whatever. So I think that your experience there, were you working at like a tech company or something?
No, it was for a construction company.
Okay.
But they're just a big general contractor.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking I was going to get myself in trouble.
Yeah, and you're probably right. I don't know. It was a net positive. It was a net positive for me, like to be kind of conditioned into, and just having respect for that environment. And
yeah, I agree. I feel the same.
Yeah. So yeah, it was a net positive.
Yeah, back to, I was just thinking when you're talking about the intensity, there's something about when someone has a very high stakes situation and they have so much composure, it's almost like they're monotone. Like that intimidation factor is very high. It's just like,
I admire it.
Yeah, because when somebody can essentially articulate and deliver the intensity of a situation with so much composure, that it's like, fuck, this is even worse than if this guy was just off the hinges right now.
Yeah, and it's actually very similar to something that's
It's worse, or
it's almost worse because you're like, this is so intense, and this guy's got so much composure.
But that's a good thing if they're handling it well.
Well, it's good for them that they can handle it well, but you being the recipient of that news is like, fuck, this guy's like.
There's a gut check where you're like, okay, this guy's serious, and this is even more serious than I thought.
He's so serious that he can hold his composure. He's done this before. I'm like, fuck.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the funny thing is like what you're talking about and what I was talking about with, these like managing partners at this big, private equity firm is it's a different world, but it's also very similar to what I've experienced on the Bering Sea, where you can see someone who's usually a complete animal of a human keeps their head super cool in a hot situation. I mean, you see crazy shit out there every single day. And, once a week, you see something that's like pretty crazy. Once a month fishing, you see something that's going to change you forever. And so like, that's kind of that environment, but you see people in the way that they stay safe, so cool in a fast paced, highly unpredictable, austere environment. And like someone who's, if you're with them at the bar in the town, they're like an animal. Like it could be the cops are coming, kind of person, but they're so focused and they're so smooth. And honestly, they're just in that flow state to be able to handle a really intense situation. And then kind of, you see it in these organizations where it's calm, cool, collect. Things are really intense, but this guy is able to just like totally auger in and be really cool in that situation. It's humbling and it's great to see and huge inspiration.
I think I was going to ask you too, when you were saying you were kind of doing research on these deals, what was kind of the main, like, are you doing a lot of research on the computer? Are you doing a lot of boots on the ground?
It's both. So I think the reason all these companies, these two private equity firms I worked for hired me was that I know how to talk to blue collar folks. And there's a lot of consolidation in these industrial services businesses, and they're really nice investments. And you have the boomers are starting to age out. And so you have this environment where founders are ready to cash out, and they're put off by these white collar suit wearing urban deal serpents that come in and they're like spitting all this fucking finance shit.
Deal serpents.
And no,
these motherfuckers are snakes.
Yeah. And so they see these people coming in and it's like, oh, and he's like, and I've seen this environment. I've seen this 100 times, right? Where like the deal team walks in, I'm part of it, but we walk in and you got the executive team from like, they're doing industrial refrigeration or something. And this is like 100 million revenue company. This is not a small thing. And like you come in, these guys don't have any college degrees at all, but they've created something very successful and very valuable. And then the deal guys come in and like you do intros, right? And guys like, okay.
And they have like nothing in common with each other.
No, they're like, oh, my dad started this company back in the 60s. I really like fishing and hunting and all this, cool like stuff that I think is really cool. And then the deal guys are like, well, okay. And he's like, my name is so-and-so. I went to Harvard for undergrad and then I went to Yale for my MBA. And this guy's like, I went to Stanford and Princeton and I worked for BlackRock and Goldman Sachs. And like the founders of this industrial company, just like, they're like, it's like cringe, and they're the ones with the real power. Cause like, they're like, okay, there's like a line of private equity firms out the door basically that are wanting to buy my company. Mm-hmm. Like you guys are just fucking money to me.
Yeah.
I'm a money machine. We create profit. And so I got called into these two companies, I think, because I can talk to these people.
You can relate to them.
Yeah. And like, I've turned a wrench, mm-hmm. I know how to use tools. I know how to I drive a truck. Like I'm, you know, like
You're like a normal dude.
yeah. And then on top of it, I killed wildlife for a living for 10 years.
Yeah.
And so like, there's just kind of like, and so I came in and I also had the finance
So
toolkit. And so they kind of brought me in to sort of originate these relationships as well. And then they kind of leaned on me to kind of understand industries from like a much different standpoint, because to an investor on Wall Street or Sand Hill Road in Menlo Park, these guys look at businesses as assets. It's not an organization of people. It's not like they're not keeping the economy going. Like they look at it as like a 3-statement financial analysis, a balance sheet, income statement, you know, like they're looking at the numbers and they're calculating on Excel, and like they think about the deal structure, and they think about how you could take this company, inject $10 million into it, expand into new regions. And like, they're very, very smart on that kind of stuff. But like at the end of the day, it's humans talking to humans and trying to come to a deal. And so like, I think they brought me in to sort of originate, build trust, and then lean on my ability to kind of look at these industries from my perspective and like how these things work. And so, yeah. And I, you know, I feel like I came up with some pretty good ideas, like just by kind of different things, whether it's understanding diesel mechanics or, you know, understanding what it's like to be a tradesman, or, you know, just things like that. Like I was able to kind of find these different pockets of opportunity for investors. And
It's such a great contrast to bring to the table with your essentially new academic background and your lifetime of the work you were in.
I mean, I think we're in an interesting time. You were talking about HVAC, plumbing, electrical companies earlier. Now you're talking about some of these, you know, whether it's a refrigeration company. You could talk about all kinds of stuff. Let's just say the trades, anything that's in a trade right now. I think we're in an interesting time where less and less people understand how things actually work, the mechanics of them, the logistics, like the tangible things. I think less and less people understand how they work. And even people that are investing in the companies don't understand how they work, right? So if you're a guy that grew up and your parents went to Ivy League school and now you're in Ivy League, you know, you went to Ivy League school and you've never had to turn a wrench or dig
or you've looked down on the people who do turn wrenches.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so I think there's an interesting time right now where if people who work in the trades or own a business that's in the trades, they now have leverage on the world that they've never had, and then are now about to, if they pay attention, they now are now in a spot where it's like it's a supply and demand thing, right? So if the demand for these people's services is getting higher and higher and higher because less and less people in the world know how to do these things or are knowledgeable about the business, then ultimately their value is going up every day. And so it's an interesting time that I think is going to transition where, like, I think in the next 20 or 30 years, there's going to be a killing to be made in the trades, an absolute killing, because you don't need a lawyer when it's -30 out and your fucking heater doesn't work. You need a fucking HVAC tech, and that dude's going to get paid $500 an hour. And I'm talking like the dude who's turning the wrench, right? And right now, these people make $50 an hour. But over time, if less and less people go into the trades, these people are going to make a ton of money. And so anyway, I think there's an inflection point happening of like we've valued things that are less tangible in life, and those things that are very tangible we've kind of ignored.
I'd say that's fair, definitely. And I hope that, you know, in the face of all this like investor money coming into the trades and consolidating things, like I hope that it doesn't put too much downward pressure on wages. And if it does, I hope that the rebels will rise up, and hopefully there'll be a way that you can have like a technology, with the advent of AI and all these different things coming in, hopefully you can have a digital business in the box where a one-man team has the infrastructure of a multi-million-dollar HVAC company, and that they can now just be contacted at any time. It handles their taxes, their billing, their scheduling, their field service, route optimization. All of it is just managed from a cloud system. And so that you don't need to have $100,000 of business debt over your head to get started or something like that.
Yeah.
So that's what I hope.
Yeah. You hope that it balances out, that like, or like it like integrates in a balanced way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's definitely, in my opinion, the big gap right now is there's these guys that are such great tradesmen and they've honed their skill, but they're not good businessmen, and they're not good, they're personally,
they're good tradesmen, but they're terrible businessmen.
They couldn't run a schedule, and they couldn't, answer the phone and deal with a client.
Mm-hmm.
And if technology could take a big part of that, and this guy can do what he's really good at, which is be a plumber, be a HVAC, and then this technology could step in there, that could be a really cool kind of fill a big gap.
Yeah. I think it's moving in that direction for sure. It's moving in that direction. And,
what do you think of being in private equity? I'm going to ask this question in a really poorly worded way, but we'll get there. What's your thoughts on this ESG movement, and whether people actually give a shit about it? Do people care about it in private equity, or is it just all placating the public?
I think people claim to care about it. I think there's people who probably do really care about it. But for the most part, it seems to me that in the corporate realm, I want to break apart sort of mature corporations and founders of new companies. I think we should split these things apart. Like these mature corporations that are being bought and sold by private equity firms or publicly traded, things like that. I think a lot of this has to do with virtue signaling and just assuring both the customers and their investors that they're conscious about doing the right thing. But when you drill down on it, it just seems like a bunch of greenwashing for the most part. Or
I've never heard that term, greenwashing.
Do you remember Clay was talking about it?
Kind of
like greenwashing and a lot of stuff in the grocery store. Like it'll say it's.
Oh, it's
okay.
Eco. It's made out of.
Okay, that's greenwashing.
Biodegradable plastic that.
Yeah.
Or you'll a big corporation's we've moved to biodegradable coffee cups, and so now we have some sort of stamp that we're eco-conscious and stuff. Now I don't think it's not across the board, but it seems like the more corporate the more they're focused on and there's a whole gambit, right? There's DEI, there's ESG, there's this whole thing where it's more like they're trying to placate the public or the observer and trying to make it seem like they're progressive. Now, obviously, things have just changed dramatically, but
in the last 10 days.
Yeah. And so, I think all of that stuff got taken way too far. But that's a personal opinion. I think that
hey, these are good ideas, but let's not, go crazy with them.
But then you have other companies that are really delivering. Like if you look at Patagonia and the vision of Yvon Chouinard and the way that was put forward and the way that it's been executed and the way that it's been put into a land trust or into,
Do you think that's been well done?
Yeah.
Okay. Cause I don't know anything about it.
Oh yeah. No,
I've heard about it, but I don't know whether it's
the real
been done well or it's placation.
No, it's the real deal over there.
Okay.
Yeah. And, in some things, maybe in my opinion, they go a little bit too far, but for the most part,
it's real. It's authentic.
It's very real. And that's the kind of company that I want to, that's the kind of organization that I want to build as well, is one that really treats its employees really well and creates something that's actually good for society. Like the product is better than just something that you consume. It actually has a long lasting effect or does something really impactful for the customer community. And I want to build that loyalty that Patagonia's built with, cause it's more than just what they're doing for the environment. For me, it was their gear is actually so good that I feel loyal to them. They've kept me warm in very cold experiences. They've allowed me to do these things in Alaska, that technology. And so there was kind of
they're
a loyalty.
it's genuine.
Yeah,
it's genuine all through and through is what you're saying.
It's the real deal.
Yeah.
And so like those are the kind of companies that I really like. And I think that there's a lot of examples that kind of lower in the market where people are founders and they're creating these new companies. And so hopefully that becomes more widespread where it's like, you don't have to stamp an ESG like stamp on it. Like it just speaks for itself.
Yeah.
Every time I see ESG, I just think estrogen. Like, what's your estrogen?
Yeah.
Well, a lot of the ESG stuff, like ESG ratings and things like that, was for investors. There's a pretty progressive, wealthy segment in the United States, people that actually care where their trust fund is being placed and invested into, and like they want to feel good about it. Like you have someone managing your wealth, and you don't want it to be in Purdue Pharmaceuticals making OxyContin. You want it to be in, GE's like wind development or something like that. And so like a lot of that was like investments are products too. Like that's the thing, is like investors are selling investment ideas and stuff, like portfolio structures to wealthy clients. And so like the ESG stamp was a big deal for selling that. And so like when you look at kind of what was going on during the pandemic, where there was a huge rush into ESG and like a lot of those stock prices soared or things like that, like it was a lot about selling financial products to wealthy customers that have progressive ideals. And so I don't know, I think maybe it started off very well intended and kind of ended being like a bit of a hype.
Yeah, that's how it goes. I think there's good intentions, and I could see it being a good
it can be a good thing.
It could be very useful,
right?
If it was regulated properly and used properly.
Yeah, but it's abused.
Yeah, that's. I think that's kind of what we do with everything.
Became abused for profit.
Yeah, or it got washed with like a lot of bullshit, and so like it diluted some of the high quality things that were actually happening that were genuine. Mm-hmm. So
I think that's right.
Tell us about your new company, man. Your new business.
I'm gonna be very brief about this because I'm here helping my best friend start a company. We're co-founding a company, and it is a urban bathhouse. And I'm gonna be kind of vague about this because I really would rather have him here because he's an incredible human, and we'll get in here together with you guys.
Cool. Awesome.
But I'll give you the general idea and where it came from.
Yeah, whenever you guys are ready, that would be awesome.
Yeah, we'd love to. So, Alaska, it started in Alaska for me. Alaska is heavily steeped in Russian tradition. So the sauna, cold plunge kind of thing came from Russian bathing culture, the Russian banya. In Alaska, the commercial fishing community is, you beat up your body, you put your head through a bunch of stress, you're on land for a limited time. Saunas kind of started to proliferated and became adopted into that hardworking, rugged culture. And I started to see it up there. Usually there's a wood-fired sauna next to a creek, lots of cold water up there. There's no shortage of that kind of thing. So I kind of was brought into it there. That's where I first started to see like something in contrast therapy. And then through a dear friend of mine, I was introduced to a Russian bathhouse in San Francisco. Now, when he first told me, he's like, hey, come to this Russian bathhouse with me in the city. I was like, I don't know, man. Like, I like getting weird, but I'm not sure if I'm ready for that. And he's like, no, it's not what you think.
San Francisco's got some weird shit in there.
Yeah. And he's like, it's not what you think, but it is nude. I was like, oh my God. So, I went and we get in there, and the thing about Russian culture is that it's pretty strict on etiquette. And I realized that there was some sort of ancient etiquette in this experience, and there was no touching, there's no snuggling. There was men and women equally, naked women, naked men. And there's no touching. There's no, like, you can't sit close enough to touch.
Yep.
You can't look at people. There's a lot of rules. And I went in there, and this place is called Archimedes. It's really, in my opinion, it's where a lot of this new age stuff kind of actually emanated from. A lot of people don't know it, but people like Andrew Huberman frequent Archimedes very often. A lot of the tech execs go there. It's like
there's a culture.
It's got a whole thing, and it's not what you would have thought. It's not like the woo-woo wellness as much. And there's some of that there for sure, but it's kind of like it's its own thing. And I went there in 2011 on my way to fly out from California to the Bering Sea. And I went to the Bering Sea and could not stop thinking about it. I was like, I cannot wait to get back there. The first thing I did as I went back, and then it became sort of a portal of entry and exit whenever I was in California visiting my family on the coast. And it became kind of folded into my health ritual. And for several years, it's just something that I've always thought about and always wanted to do. And I just kept doing it and it became a habit. And first it started as like a way to kind of relieve the stress and tension and body tension of being an athlete. And then as I moved into this academic grind, it became a way to really reset my mind. And it is, been very medicinal for me and had a huge impact on me. And over the last decade, it's something that every major city I go to, I seek out, like either the Russian banya or like now the whole industry shifted. We're kind of part of that shift. It's gone from kind of Russian and Korean and Japanese onsen, like traditional bathing, to more of like a modern, what they call a social wellness experience. And I think what social wellness is in the context of a bathhouse is it's sort of an alternative way to hang out, a third space. It's not a restaurant. It's not a brewery. It's not a bar. It's not a nightclub, but it fills that same social kind of space, and it's wellness focused. And so my business partner, Paul, and I, we originally wanted to do this in 2019 in Seattle, and then COVID happened. And so we put it on ice. And then coming out of COVID in 2021, 2022, started to see this huge surge in this stuff. Yep. And we're like, oh, okay, well, we know quite a bit about this industry and this thing has legs. And you see these other companies like Sauna House go from 1 location to 2 to 8 to working on 20. And now you see Sweat House kind of go from like 1 to 10 to 60 to 80 to 100. And then you see, and they're on kind of one side of the spectrum. And then on the other side, you have sort of the, not luxury, but much more immersive experience. These are much more expensive to build. These are what we call flagship model bathhouses. And you see these companies called like Othership. It's like Mothership without, have you heard of it?
No.
Check it out.
Othership
started in Canada. Now it's in New York City. They're working on their, I think, second location in New York, maybe their third or fourth total. You have Brooklyn Bath, which is another flagship model, super nice, moody, lit, really cool architecture. It's just like taking off. And you see these things that are starting to happen. And it's just such a great way to drop out, to connect with people, to feel euphoric. You guys know, it sounds like you've done this hot, cold thing before. It's got a narcotic feel to it. Yeah. You can't deny it. It gives you a buzz. And it's just this really cool thing that we love. And like,
but I don't know that I've ever been to one that has the energy that you're describing. I always get an energy from them, and I really enjoy them. Mm-hmm. But what you're describing is super exciting.
Well, you'll get a chance to here in about 2 months. We're kind of in stealth mode right now. We're not really we're not promoting it right now. We want it to kind of just emerge into the community, but you'll get to see what a really high end one looks like, because we're turning it to 11. It's going to be a wizardly temple.
Well, the way we heard about you guys was I was walking down the street. And I'm in construction, and cool. I look to my right, and I'm like, what the fuck is going on in there? Like, that looks gnarly. And so I peek my head in, and I'm like, that's cool. I'm like, and then I then I go back outside, and there's a sign on the outside, and I'm like, okay, cool. I was like, this looks really cool. And him and I had just had a meeting, so then we walked over there and poked our heads back in, and we're like, this is going to be awesome.
Yeah, it is.
You're definitely doing a serious renovation.
Oh,
yeah. You're doing a serious renovation on a very difficult piece of property.
Yeah, and my partner in this, Paul, he's just. I'm so glad I have him because he is such an engineer mind. He's not like a professional engineer, but he is a wizard.
That's how his mind works.
He's a wizard with math and mechanics. And this is a very heavy mechanical business. It's actually, especially the type that we're building. It's like a small specialty water treatment manufacturing plant down there. And, but it's going to be dressed up very nice. And we're using one of the best interior designers in the world, from Canada, who's designed the interior. It's going to be moody. It's going to be very cool. And, we'll do a deep dive. We'll do a whole episode if you'd like, talking about it.
That'd be awesome.
It's been a crazy journey. And, we think, that this is going to be something very special for the Bozeman community. And I think it's going to change the town. Actually, I don't want to seem too arrogant.
That's fucking awesome, dude.
Yeah, it's going to be very special and very, very high quality. So I look forward to doing a deep dive with you guys about it. I think our vision is to definitely, we're going to grow it. And, we think that it's an important time. I think for a bunch of different reasons, but for me, I feel like, coming out of the pandemic, something has changed. And I think that there's sort of
people's psyche.
Yeah. I think that there's we're moving into an era where like this narrative of ever increasing progress through technology is I think going to flatten out a little bit. And I think we're coming into a time where people are politically fatigued, disillusioned with tech, and are kind of seeking some sort of old world health ritual to connect. And it's not everybody, but I think that there's something going on, and it's not just contrast therapy. It's not just wellness or any of this stuff. There's some sort of shift going on with millennials, Gen Z. And I think these sorts of old world ritual kind of things modernized is going to kind of become a big deal, because I think it picks up where tech really fell short. Tech is promised to connect everybody, but in a strange way, it's sort of siloed a lot of people. And like this sort of ancient practice of like social bathing is, I think, really potent. And I think the thing about contrast therapy for me that's really important is, actually, when you talk to people who study addiction sciences, like I was talking to someone here, actually Paul's partner, Jenny, about this, and she was like, addiction really comes down to control. It's being able to have that control over your mind. And it's funny because it's also simultaneously you're losing control. But like, I want to feel differently. Boom. You can feel differently by taking a drug or something like that. And obviously it has all sorts of negative ramifications. But the thing about putting yourself in a 200-degree sauna is that if you couldn't let yourself out at any time, you'd panic, because you would have a heat stroke eventually and die. You can't survive. Humans can't survive in there for hours on end. Right. But the ability to just open the door and take yourself out of that intensity, it's really interesting. And it allows you to push it an inch further every time, or kind of really test yourself. And the same thing with cold water. If you sink into 45-degree water and you're in the middle of a frozen or a cold, like the ocean, the Bering Sea or something, you're going to panic because hypothermia, your body starts to stop moving. But in the cold plunge, you can get in there, and at any second you can get out. And so you're like putting yourself in these serious, like intense sort of immersive moments where you're completely wrapped in this intensity that otherwise would feel very dangerous, but at any second you can get out. And I think that control is there's something there with the neuroscience of it all. And like, I think people really like that. And it causes this sort of euphoric kind of experience to come out of it that I think is great. And I think it does really good things for people, and for us three to be in a sauna together and kind of connect, talk about, potent topics that are, until we can't stand it anymore. And then we go and we get in a cold plunge together and we kind of see each other going through that intensity. That connection is pretty powerful. And I think in some ways it's kind of like my days on the Bering Sea, where, like I said, I was working with prison hard Hells Angels type people. And like, you were able to just kind of find this really common humanity between us. I think the same thing, but more gentle, is this, where you can be in there scantily clothed with a bunch of strangers, but still feel some sort of kind of like deep human connection with them. You don't even have to be talking actually to feel it. And it's just kind of the opposite of like social media, where it's just like flashy. Everything's kind of this cheap dopamine kind of, it's like, it's maybe less social, but more connective in a way.
Yeah. That's very well put. Like the way you said all that. Cause the first time I ever went was a banya it's like North Seattle, north of downtown.
Is it Banya 5?
It might've been. It's been there for a while. Yeah. This was like pre-COVID time.
Yeah, I used to go there all the time.
That was my first experience ever. And I don't know, there was guys in there with the leaves, and they did everything. It was pretty Russian from what I understand, Definitely. Like culture wise. And then I've really since then I've been very interested. Funny enough, me and Kyle went to a sort of, what's the name?
Heat proxia.
Heat proxia. They started in Coeur d'Alene.
There's two of them, one in Coeur d'Alene and one in St. George.
And
Nice.
we did that. We happened to just walk by. And so we just went in and did their sauna cold plunge. I think that seemed like a real knockoff version of the one that I did in Washington.
The Russian banya is the real deal.
Yeah, that's because you were saying you haven't had that experience. That was the best experience.
It's a better heat. It's a better heat.
Just the camaraderie that you build when you sit and you go through something hard with a bunch of people. And I've got a martial arts background, at least since I've lived in Bozeman, so I understand it from that, because you're struggling, you're competing together, but this it hits all those buttons in that same way, that the community, the hard thing together, the actual just proven health benefits of it.
Right.
You made me pumped. I'm pumped for this place though.
Oh yeah, you're gonna be stoked because it's gonna be every bit as good as what you saw in Seattle. I think it's gonna be better, and it's definitely gonna be better. And I mean, that's kind of it too. Like I remember my early days in San Francisco at Archimedes. You come into this sauna that can fit 40 people, and you're in there, and there's just like, you got everything from like the mixed martial art UFC people that came as a group, and then you've got like, maybe the super hard left woke, Bay Area people in there, and you've got like the finance people and the tech people and the garbage truck driver and everyone. Like
you have everybody in the same place. That's
the
awesome.
Plumber, the HVAC guy, everyone's in this one space, and they're all just like in this meditative set. It's really powerful. I think that in some ways it touches on what it's like to be in church or something like that, like, I don't know, but it feels like that.
I'd agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel really, really stoked to be part of building something like that. And I give most of the credit to my partner. He's really the systems thinker. I'm more of like the growth guy,
And what's Paul's last name?
His last name's Byrne.
Paul Byrne.
Yeah.
Got it.
We'll get in here. It'll be fun. We'll drop them. We could do it there even. I don't know if this stuff's mobile.
Yeah, we can take this stuff. Sure. Yeah, that'd be cool.
That would be very cool.
Yeah.
What's the stuff that they drink there? The kombucha? Is it just?
I don't know. It probably.
There was something they served there at that one in Seattle. I know a bunch of guys were drinking or something.
So that one, there was kind of like a tea station upstairs.
Yep.
Yeah. I don't know. It probably changes a bit there. Like the real Russian banyas, like the ones in New York that are like very authentic, vodka. It's not as much about like that type of wellness as it is about this type of wellness. Mm-hmm. I think it's, and I personally do like to enjoy a bevy before going in the sauna. It's not for everybody, but, and we won't be serving alcohol right away, actually, because liquor permits in this town are crazy and we don't want to deal with it. But we are going to have food. That's another thing is just we're working with a really incredible restaurateur here, this guy from France, Batter. And so there will be a full-on food offering there. So you can do a paired experience.
We got to introduce you to Bailey.
Yeah.
Bailey's the owner of Ekam Yoga.
Okay.
And she's just an awesome person. And anyway, connection that I was thinking about.
It was funny because years ago, me and Kyle, after going to that one in Coeur d'Alene, we had talked about trying to open something like that here, which is ironic that we're sitting here with you now. And we both just have too much going on. And it was just a thought, but it's very exciting that it's happening.
A bunch of different ways to do it for sure. There's kind of the lightweight style where you have a barrel sauna and some like watering troughs full of cold water. Mm-hmm. And then there's kind of the flagship style where it's several $1 million and it's a huge lift. And we decided to go this way because we feel like we want to create like the best. We want to turn it to 11. We want to see what's possible.
There's a huge, and that's why I said I've never had the real experience. I've done the sauna and the cold plunge, but I think the design of the space is maybe even more important. Meaning, like the one that we did in Coeur d'Alene,
it was no offense, it was pretty terrible.
Well, it was just like the layout, right? It was like you go from one sauna, and then you got to walk around the corner to get into a tub, and so
a single person tub too.
So anyways, it was a completely different. That's a different experience, right? It's more of like I don't know what to describe it. I guess what I'm getting at is, I think it looks like, at least what we saw when you guys were doing construction, looks like the way that you guys are doing it is kind of integrating everything all together.
Yep. It's going to be a very immersive experience, and it should have that feel.
I'm sure it will.
Of a separate world that when you're not in it, you crave it. And when you get back, it feels like you're almost in this familiar home-like place. It's gonna be very moody. It's gonna be very temple-like, and you guys
Awesome.
will be impressed.
Cool.
Yeah.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Couple months.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Cool.
We'll get you guys on the launch party invite list.
That'd be freaking
Hell
sweet,
yeah.
man.
Yeah. You'll dig it.
Cool. You're an interesting person.
Thanks.
Super interesting.
Yeah, man.
Hell of a story. Maybe somebody should make a movie about you.
Yeah.
And you know, yeah, that would be anyway. Super interesting guy. I mean, goddamn, you've lived like multiple lives in the last 15 years or so. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, it's been wild, and it's really, there's been a lot of dark days for sure. It's not
Sure.
perfect. It's not a perfect movie script, but yeah, there's been a lot of intense juxtapositions of lifestyles, and it ultimately led me to my wife, who is here with me. She's from the Central Coast.
Okay.
We didn't meet on the Central Coast, but she's here in Montana with me. We're actually having a kid in the next few weeks.
Congrats,
man.
It's awesome.
Yeah,
Good
and,
for you.
If
For
having
you
her
guys.
having her partnership through this entrepreneurial kind of pre-revenue phase has been clutch, because it's not easy, and it's amazing what a strong partner that you're obsessively in love with how that can give you strength that you never would have otherwise had.
Yeah.
So it's very cool, and yeah, it'll be nice. Our baby will be born in Montana, and yeah, it's the beginning of another really cool story. And
Awesome. Yeah. You got a bunch of new chapters coming up.
yeah, got to keep it exciting, and yeah.
Cool.
Hell yeah.
Well, thanks, man.
Yeah. Thanks, Tyler.
This is great.
Thanks, you guys. This is great.
Thanks.
Yeah. Best of luck too. I mean,
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
yeah. That was really fun.
No, that was awesome, man.